in the 1984 NBA Draft. Arguably the strongest draft in NBA history. Drafted in the 1984 NBA Draft. Arguably the strongest draft in NBA history. Olajuwon was the first pick. Jordan was third, and Barkley went fifth. NBA history. Olajuwon was the first pick. Jordan was third, and Barkley went fifth. Stockton was selected 16th overall by the Jazz, and the following year, the Jazz drafted Karl Malone. During their years together, Stockton and Malone would become the deadliest guard-forward pairing in the NBA. NBA career. One big constant. When Stockton first came to Utah after the draft, he immediately asked the Jazz coaching staff to give him all available VHS tapes of Jazz games from last season. He studied their plays all Jazz coaching staff to give him all available VHS tapes of Jazz games from last season. He studied their plays
DoorDash allows me to be free for my son, and it allows me to make the money to fund my passions.
Anybody want to donate today?
summer, and when the training camp started, John knew every offensive and defensive set, how everybody moved, and where his teammates liked to get the ball. This was 1984, and the habit of watching tape was basically non-existent, but Stockton was different. During my entire rookie season, I expected to be cut, and that's why I came so prepared. There was no relaxation for me. I think I was the player who spent the least money in one season ever. I rented the cheapest possible apartment. I didn't buy anything in it. I didn't even turn on the heating, Stockton recalled jokingly. Stockton came off the bench in his first 3 seasons, averaging 7 points, 7 assists, and just 2 turnovers in 21 minutes per game. He didn't do anything flashy on the court. There were no behind-the-back passes or crazy crossovers. Everything he did was fundamentally sound, and his highlights were often just simple bounce passes with perfect timing. When he became a starter for the 1987-88 season, John immediately led the league in assists with 13.8 and just 3 turnovers. He averaged 15 points a game, but he took less than 10 shots, with 57% shooting from the field. From 1988 until 1996, one man led the league in assists each year, and that was Stockton, breaking Bob Cousy's record for leading the league in assists with 9 consecutive years. Out of 10 best marks for most assists, leading the league in assists with 9 consecutive years. Out of 10 best marks for most assists in a season, 7 belong to Stockton, and these are just some of his passing records. Stockton was also the only point guard in the league setting picks on much bigger players, absorbing the blows with his 6'1" body to free up teammates. Charles Barkley once said that Stockton sets the hardest picks in the league, and when Barkley says that, it means something. Yeah, Stockton was dirty, and he took every little chance to trip you, elbow you, and gain some kind of advantage. But because he was always outmatched physically, he almost had to be dirty to succeed. The Jazz made the playoffs 19 years in a row, and both Stockton and Malone don't know what it's like to miss the postseason. During their tenure, the Jazz was a you almost had to be dirty to succeed. The Jazz made the playoffs 19 years in a row, and both Stockton and Malone don't know what it's like to miss the postseason. During their tenure, the Jazz was a top 3 seed in 8 seasons, and their 64 wins in 1997 are still the franchise record. Coach Jerry Sloan wanted perfection, and he coached the Jazz with an army-like mentality, which suited his 2 All-Stars in Karl and John. There was no load management, no playing less than 100%. They played the regular season like it's the playoffs, and John Stockton never allowed his troops to slack off. During those 19 years, John didn't change a single thing. His neatly combed short hair was always the same. He trained rigorously, and he was the only player who kept playing in those ultra-short 80s shorts a decade after everybody switched to longer ones. Kept playing in those ultra-short 80s shorts a decade after everybody switched to longer ones. Stockton became the NBA's all-time assists leader in 1995, surpassing Magic Johnson's 9,921 dimes. When he broke Magic's record, Stockton didn't want the game to stop to be honored. The fans gave him a standing ovation, and he waved his hand briefly so that the game could continue. The following season, Stockton also surpassed Maurice Cheeks as the all-time record holder in steals. In 1997 and 1998, Utah played the best basketball in the West, won the #1 seed. Stockton also surpassed Maurice Cheeks as the all-time record holder in steals. In 1997 and 1998, Utah played the best basketball in the West, won the #1 seed each year, and went to the NBA Finals. When he made the buzzer-beating three-pointer against Barkley and Olajuwon in the '97 playoffs for a series win and a place in their first finals, it was the only time where we have ever seen him lose his cool and show a lot of emotions on the court. And then in the finals, a lack of experience, lack of luck, and Michael Jordan declined the Jazz and Stockton the privilege to win a ring. But those series were much closer than people think. Almost every game was decided in the final minute, and Phil Jackson always said that the two finals against Utah were the hardest of the Bulls' 6 titles. From 1998, when he was 35, against Utah were the hardest of the Bulls' 6 titles. From 1998, when he was 35, and 2003, the final year of his career at the age of 40, Stockton still averaged 50% shooting. He still played hard on defense and delivered crisp passes at the perfect place and the perfect time. But he never looked at his stats and was never interested in the personal accolades. All that mattered to him is for his team to win. After his final NBA game, a playoff loss in Sacramento in 2003, Stockton was asked to summarize his feelings about retiring without an NBA title. "A lot of this is about the journey," he said. "We worked very hard and haven't done it, and yet I feel a lot of reward out of the effort that it took to compete." The uniqueness of John Stockton. Stockton saw everything on the floor 3 steps ahead. His combination of passing precision, pace control, endurance, and tough defense were unmatched in the NBA. He was the maestro of the pick and roll when pick and roll was a novelty, and his 1-2 combination with Malone was one of the surest bets in the league for a decade. Stockton was hard as nails, and you could see that in the physicality of his play and how hard he would throw his body on drives, trying to force contact and create separation. Defensively, he was a nightmare for the opposing guards, an annoying pest who didn't mind diving for the ball, making hard fouls, and doing everything in his power to stop you. People are often praising LeBron and Durant for being so dominant and efficient at an advanced age, but these guys are freaks of nature. Stockton shot 51.5% from the floor in his career, weighing 170 pounds. And in retrospect, he should have probably taken a lot more shots himself. If he played in today's pace and space era, John could have easily taken a lot more shots himself. If he played in today's pace and space era, John could have easily cashed several threes per game. And he was one of the first players to shoot pull-up threes in half court and semi-transition. Out of his physical attributes, he had only 2 advantages: enormous ET-like hands and fingers, which helped him control the ball and throw passes with one hand. And the second was a resting heart rate of 35 beats per minute, twice less than the average man of his size. It was part of the reason why he was always composed, and why he could play with the same intensity at the end of the game, and why he'd almost never sweat. Stockton always flew under the radar, similar to Tim Duncan and Moses Malone, one of the most underrated centers ever, but that's how John preferred it. For 19 years in the league, he never had an agent, and he negotiated all of his contracts. Managers, PR, personal assistants, a 10-person entourage? Forget it. This was not Stockton's style, and he was Kawhi Leonard before Kawhi Leonard. He just played as hard as he could. Managers, PR, personal assistants, a 10-person entourage? Forget it. This was not Stockton's style, and he was Kawhi assistants, a 10-person entourage? Forget it. This was not Stockton's style, and he was Kawhi Leonard before Kawhi Leonard. He just played as hard as he could, and after the game, he was the same old John, a nice, respectable guy who gave boring answers to the media so he could be left alone and go home to his family. When asked about his favorite moment from his stay with the Dream Team in Barcelona, Stockton and go home to his family. When asked about his favorite, who gave boring answers to the media so he could be left alone and go home to his family. When asked about his favorite moment from his stay with the Dream Team in Barcelona, Stockton replied, "One girl on the street asked me to take a picture of her with Charles Barkley. She thought I was some tourist." Legacy. John Stockton is an example that hard work pays off. This small, skinny white guy missed just 22 games in a 19-year career, 18 of which in one season due to a knee injury, which is also the only serious injury of his career. He is without a doubt the best pure point guard ever. John is #1 all-time in career assists. It's not even close, with Jason Kidd in second place with almost 4,000 assists. It's not even close. The best pure point guard ever. John is #1 all-time in career assists. It's not even close, with Jason Kidd in second place with almost 4,000 assists behind him. The same as in steals, where Stockton is the only man with over 3,000 steals, with 550 more than Kidd at #2. With 10.5 assists per game, he's one of only 2 players to average double-figure assists for their career. He once had 11 assists in one quarter, and that was in a playoff game. Stockton's other career, he once had 11 assists in one quarter, and that was in a playoff game. Stockton's other assist records include most in a season, 1,164, the highest average for a season, 14.5, and most seasons leading the league in passing. He also shared the record for most assists in a playoff game with 24, and is tied for third for most assists in a regular season game with 28. If he played in the point guard era of today, he could have easily averaged 20 every year because of his phenomenal shooting ability. But all he wanted was to create perfect shots for his teammates. I swear that I never got a bad pass from Stockton. He never threw the ball behind my back, in my legs, in front of me. Every pass was right in my hands, and I just needed to shoot. Jeff Hornacek. Stockton's assists were never for the crowd to go wild. They were, above all, purposeful. No one knew how to throw a better bounce pass than Stockton, and the only time he made a flashy move was when it was the only way for his teammate to catch the ball. I often took him for granted because I knew I would get ideal passes from him every game. He always made me better. No one gave him anything. He earned everything himself. Karl Malone. Gary Payton, a Hall of Famer and one of the best defensive players ever, said that Stockton was the hardest player for him to guard, and not Michael Jordan.
Hey, baby.
But what I tell you about looking proper at my dinner table?
You've probably heard of some of these underground organizations on the news or in movies, but little is known about the actual founders. These are 10 gang founders of America. MS-13, also known as MS-13, also known as Mara Salvatrucha, is an organization that was founded in Los Angeles, California by Ernesto Miranda, aka Smokey. Smokey was a former soldier in El Salvador who fled to Los Angeles in hopes to escape the violent civil war that plagued his country. Unfortunately, he found plenty of violence on the streets of LA, specifically in the Mexican neighborhoods. This led to Smokey, alongside other war-hardened immigrants, to form the first version of MS-13, called MSS. It is believed the third S was replaced by the number 13, symbolizing the 13th letter in the alphabet, after forming an alliance with the Mexican Mafia, aka La M, for more protection in prison due to the stronghold they already had. Eventually, Ernesto was deported back to El Salvador, where he seemed to turn his life around, becoming a father, studying law, and working to keep kids out of trouble. Unfortunately for him, he was gunned down outside his home shortly after. The Jewish Mob, also known as the Kosher Mafia, is an organization that was founded by Arnold Rothstein, aka The Brain, in the early 1900s when he realized the opportunity in bootlegging liquor during Prohibition. With his main office at Broadway and 49th Street in Manhattan, he was able to accumulate over $10 million, equivalent to $125 million in today's valuation, making him one of the wealthiest gangsters in U.S. history. It wasn't the first time, making him one of the wealthiest gangsters in U.S. history. It wasn't the first time he experienced big money. Growing up, he was the son of wealthy business. It wasn't the first, making him one of the wealthiest. Way in 49th Street in Manhattan, he was able to accumulate over $10 million, equivalent to $125 million in today's valuation, making him one of the wealthiest gangsters in U.S. history. It wasn't the first time he experienced big money. Growing up, he was the son of wealthy businessman Abraham Rothstein. Since a young age, Arnold developed a gambling habit that led to him allegedly fixing the 1919 World Series. Gambling also led to his death in 1928 when he refused to pay up $320,000 he owed from a high-stakes poker game that he claimed was fixed by the other players. On his deathbed, he refused to help police identify his shooter, telling them in quotes, "You stick to your trade and I'll stick to mine." The Black Gangster Disciples is an organization that was founded in the late 60s on the south side of Chicago by Larry Hoover, the leader of the Supreme Gangsters, and David Barksdale, the leader of the Black Disciples. The two formed an alliance after Larry Hoover proposed the idea in efforts to end the senseless violence that plagued the Black community in Chicago. At first, they were able to turn their attention to community outreach programs and legitimate businesses, but that would come to an end when drugs began flooding the streets in the 70s. Some members grew extremely rich, and others fell victim to using their own supply. David Barksdale died in 1974 due to kidney failure, leaving Larry Hoover in charge from behind bars. Larry Hoover had just been sentenced to 6 life terms for racketeering charges. With the two leaders off the streets, the organization began feuding with each other. Up until now, there seems to be a rivalry between what was once a strong alliance. BMF, also known as the Black Mafia Family, was an organization that was founded in Detroit in the late 80s by Demetrius Flannery, aka Big Meech, alongside his brother Terry. By the year 2000, they had a direct link to the Mexican cartels, which helped establish a $250 million coke distribution empire throughout the U.S. The feds claimed that they had 2 main hubs, one in Atlanta for distribution, ran by Big Meech, and one in Los Angeles for incoming shipments from Mexico, ran by Brother Terry. Around this time, Big Meech had established BMF Entertainment, a promotion agency in efforts to legitimize their source of income. The business front allowed Big Meech to launder illegal earnings by funding legitimate events, associating with high-profile hip-hop artists like T.I., Fabulous, Jay-Z, and more. Big Meech being in the limelight and flexing his wealth caused a fallout between the two brothers. His brother Terry was claiming that Meech was attracting the wrong attention, but by 2005, the feds had 900 pages of wiretap conversations, which led to the indictment of both brothers. Both ended up pleading guilty and were sentenced to 30 years in prison. The Trinitarios, named after 3 revolutionaries of the Dominican War of Independence, is an organization founded in the early 90s in New York by Leonidas Sierra, aka Junito, alongside Julio Marin, aka Caballo. Junito created the organization within Rikers Island Jail, comprised of Dominican descendants to protect themselves from other ruthless inmates. Eventually, when members were being released from jail, the organization began gaining power in the streets of New York. That led to Junito establishing a central committee that conveyed orders and messages to the street leaders. For years, Junito would greenlight hits on oppositions in the streets and in the prison system, all from behind bars. In 2009, as part of Operation Patria, the feds charged at least 147 members in an attempt to dismantle the organization. Then in 2014, founder Junito was sentenced to 19 years for racketeering, which would run consecutively with his 22 years to life sentence he was already serving. Latin.
I'm always shopping the Real. They drop over 10,000 new arrivals every day.
Gucci, Rolex.
Kings is one of the oldest and Latin Kings is one of the oldest and largest Latino street organizations that was founded in 1954 on the west side of Chicago by Raymond Santos, aka Papa King. Papa King, a Cuban raised in Puerto Rico, first founded a 3-boy club called the Imperials to defend themselves against the Italians and Greeks that were oppressing Puerto Ricans at the Imperials to defend themselves against the Italians and Greeks that were oppressing Puerto Ricans at the time. But it wasn't until they merged with a group of Mexican youths called the Mar Kings that they would gain notoriety in Chicago. In 1964, King Papo and White Sal, the leader of the Mar Kings, officially became one organization and birthed the name Latin Kings. They felt it needed to be done so they could bring an end to the oppression of all Latinos. Eventually, the organization, like many others, joined the drug trade in the 70s for funding as well as using. Due to the heavy use, the organization created a constitution of rules, one being a zero tolerance for hard substances. By 1972, founder King Papo stepped down as leader, and in the summer of 1988, he had disappeared, with rumors that he had either fled the country or that there was an internal hit on his life. Neither was confirmed. The Gambino family, originally called the D'Aquila family, was founded in 1910 by Salvatore D'Aquila in East Harlem, New York. Salvatore was a Sicilian immigrant that arrived in East Harlem, New York. It was founded in 1910 by Salvatore D'Aquila in East Harlem, New York. Salvatore was a Sicilian immigrant that arrived in the U.S. in 1906. He soon joined and rose the ranks in the Morello family. But in 1910, his boss Giuseppe Morello was sentenced to 10 years in prison, allowing Salvatore to separate himself and start his own organization, naming it after himself. Operating in East Harlem and the Bronx, he rivaled the same family he was once captain in. He even put a hit out on him in the Bronx. He rivaled the same family he was once captain in. He even put a hit out on his ex-boss Giuseppe when he was released from prison in 1925. But 3 years later, in 1928, Salvatore was gunned down in an alleyway in Manhattan. It wasn't until the sixth boss of this same organization that they adopted the name Gambino family after Carlo Gambino's rise in 1957. It's believed that his name is the one that stuck out of 11 total bosses throughout history because he was able to merge two families for the first time. Organization that they adopted the name Gambino family after Carlo Gambino's rise in 1957. It's believed that his name is the one that stuck out of 11 total bosses throughout history because he was able to merge two families for the first time and also earn the family over $500 million a year in today's first time and also earn the family over $500 million a year in today's valuation, as well as never receiving a hit on his life during his 19-year run.
Over 100 gold medals and counting. Black Box, come over to the savvy side.
Mexican Mafia, also known as La M, is an organization that was founded in 1957 by Luis Flores, aka Güero Buff, alongside 13 other Hispanic street members from different sets in Los Angeles. Flores was able to form a truce and get these 13 OGs from opposing sets to put aside their differences to form the Mexican Mafia while locked up in the Deo Vocational Institution. He found this necessary for protection against opposing threats and also to have complete control of the black market. He was able to accomplish just that by recruiting the most elite individuals to cement the organization's authority overall. By 1961, the organization's power was so overwhelming that the State Department of Corrections decided to transfer some core members to adult facilities like San Quentin Prison. With direct connections to Mexican cartels and Mexican mafia leaders like Rodolfo Cadena frontlining in new facilities, the organization had a monopoly throughout the state. Eventually, they had members from every Hispanic set join the family and even formed an alliance with the Aryan Brotherhood. Real quick, I want to say that I now have shirts, hoodies, phone cases, and more for anyone that wants a piece of Time Watch 5 or simply just wants to support the channel. I'll leave a link in the description. Now, organization that was founded in the late 60s in Los Angeles by Raymond Washington. As a kid, Washington joined a gang called the Avenues in East LA, but ended up leaving due to the static between himself and the leader's brother. He then founded his own set called the Baby Avenues, recruiting young kids from South Central LA. Later on, he rebranded the growing set into the Crips, derived from his brother Reggie Washington's nickname. With a growing reputation as one of the best fist fighters in South Central, he was able to influence smaller sets to join the Crips and become subgroups. In 1971, Washington approached another gang leader named Stanley Williams, aka Tookie, in the high school they were both attending. He had heard about Tookie because he had a big reputation for fighting larger, more established gangs. Washington proposed they form a confederation to form a single, large organization under the Crip brand. Tookie accepted the offer and united the West and the East, making the Crips the largest street gang in Los Angeles. Years later, Washington was gunned down at the age of 25, and in 2005, Tookie Williams received a lethal injection in San Quentin State Prison for a quadruple homicide. First, I would like to mention that the man you see on the thumbnail did not start the First Blood set. What he did start was the United Blood Nation, and I'll get more into that later. So no one man is credited as founder of the Bloods because it was created as a breakaway group from a bigger organization, the Crips. In 1969, the Crips were becoming the most dominant organization in Los Angeles and were absorbing smaller surrounding sets, one of them being the Pyrus. It wasn't until opposing smaller sets grew tired of being victimized for not joining the Crips that the Pyrus broke away and formed a new alliance with sets like the Brims, Luther Park Hustlers, Denver Lanes, and the Bishops. This new alliance addressed each other as Bloods and gained notoriety for offering protection against the dominant Crips. Now, the UBN, also known as the United Blood Nation, is an organization that was founded in 1993 inside of Rikers Island Jail by Omar Porty, aka OG Mac, alongside Leonard McKenzie. The UBN was created for protection from Latino gangs like the Nietas and the Latin Kings that were oppressing non-Latino members. Shortly after, they would form subsets, including the Nine Trade Gangsters and many more. In 1999, OG Mac was released and back on the streets of New York, where he would build the UBN into a much more powerful organization. But only 3 years after his release, he caught 10 new charges, including racketeering, and was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
I'm Rimby Matua, founder of Rimby & Co., a Curl specializing brand.
If you're looking for insurance for your business, go spend 10 minutes. Go to nextinsurance.com and get a quote. Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Max Maxwell.
On the 7th of October 2002, a nurse drops her 13-year-old nephew, Iran Brown, in front of Benjamin Tasker Middle School in Bowie, Maryland. Less than a second later, a bullet from a long-range rifle tears through his abdomen and leaves him bleeding on the floor. As his aunt nurse races against time, bound for the emergency room, praying that her nephew will survive. The first question on anyone's mind would be why? Why would anyone target a child with that amount of firepower? But Iran Brown's aunt knew better. There was no method to this madness. Her nephew was just another unfortunate yet random victim of a coordinated killing spree that was ravaging the Washington metropolitan area. And as the police would rightfully fear, her sweet nephew wouldn't be the last. Welcome back to Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we are going to deep dive into the cold and dreadful violent case of the DC snipers. From a sinister perspective, the events of the DC sniper case couldn't be more timely. In the year 2002, Americans were still recovering from both the shock of 9/11 and the anthrax attacks. So, when some unknown snipers started gunning people at random on the streets of DC in that same year, it was as if someone had revived a very familiar fear. Our case begins in Montgomery County, a peaceful suburban town just north of Washington, D.C. The county was known for its affluent residents, serene and safe environment, the ideal bubble for raising kids in an increasingly violent America. However, on the 2nd of October 2002, that bubble would burst. At around 7:41 a.m., a family man named James Martin was getting groceries for his wife and an 11-year-old son when a high-caliber bullet ripped through his chest. He died within minutes. At the time of the shooting, the police were confused. This was not the kind of crime one would expect in a neighborhood like theirs. It had never happened in the county before, and this would be an unexpected first. The police combed the area for bullet casings, but they didn't find anything. No evidence, no clues, just questions. On the 3rd of October, while police were still pondering the killing of the day before, an emergency call came out that cut the Montgomery Police Department where it hurt. A woman had spotted her neighbor bleeding on his lawn next to his lawnmower. The victim was Sonny Buchanan, and he was the son of former Montgomery County police officer. The woman thought it was the lawnmower that had cut him, but when paramedics arrived, they quickly realized that it was far from a domestic.